Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We'll get started probably in a minute or so just to give people time to hop on, but a lot of you are already here. Thanks for joining. We'll get started in a minute. Still convinced we need some music or something before we get started here. Looks like most of you are on, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining. I was looking today, and we've done this for about a year and a half. So a lot of you have been here through a lot of it, so I appreciate you still hopping on. It looks like you guys are still getting things from these webinars, so that's awesome. As always, if there's any topics specifically that you want us to go over, feel free to send that to us either in the chat here or at support@rakedigital.com. We are looking to make these webinars really applicable for your day-to-day processes, but also kind of expand your knowledge into Finlee, since you guys, most of you have been longtime users of Finlee. So we want to make sure that this content is still relevant for you and then helps you kind of assess your day-to-day process and increase your efficiency using the application. So again, thanks for hopping on. If you guys have any questions during this time, feel free to put that in the chat or the QA section. It can be relative to what I'm talking about or any other general questions that you have. So feel free to put that in the chat and we'll definitely have time to go over that today. I'm kind of recycling a topic here, but it's been a while since I talked about this topic. It's sort of related to what we did last month, but what we're going to go over today is dispelling the myth of timing issues. If you guys have had a lot of one-on-one time with me, I always kind of recoil at the term timing issues. So we'll talk about why that is kind of a myth when it comes to reconciliation, and then how to spot deficiencies in processes, which I think is a great conclusion to that topic of timing issues. Of course, we're going to have time at the end for Q&A. So again, any questions, topic suggestions, anything that you want to say, we can put in the chat or Q&A section, and we'll definitely have time to get to that. So thanks again for hopping on today. We probably aren't going to go into Finlee, the application today, so you're just going to have to watch me talking about these topics today, but hopefully this will give you some good questions to ask you or your team about kind of where you're at in reconciliation, if there's something that you can improve on, or if there's some process maybe that's not being fully solidified that's causing some issues within Finlee. So as I said, I really think that quote unquote timing issues can always be addressed and resolved, especially since the nature of your Finlee tenant or your login to Finlee is a custom setup to your organization. Every single organization, every service bureau operates just a little bit differently, even if some of you are on the same software. The way that you guys process your payrolls, process tax payments, all just slightly differ, and that operational change kind of lends to the customized setup of each organization. So really, I'm going to be pretty general today, but of course, like your operations specifically at your service bureau have like a hand-in-hand correlation to what people would quote unquote call timing issues. So I'll give some examples here today. And if you guys have specific questions about your operational practices or maybe some exceptions that you're regularly getting, of course, just reach out to us and I'll talk about that a little bit here in the following section as well. So we first want to, anytime that we see what we would call timing issues or subledger rec items that we can't necessarily get to the resolution of, we want to really understand the root cause. A large factor in what people would call timing issues and what I see when I hop on with customers. I mean, I hopped on with a customer this week talking about the quote unquote timing issues. is that one of the biggest root causes of an increase in subledger rec items, or again, what someone would call a timing issue, is when a report is ran incorrectly. So everything that you guys do as far as reconciliation in Finlee is driven by the reports that you're importing on a daily basis. So that is the information feed from your softwares that you're processing, you know, your payroll software and your tax software, if that's separate, your bank, everything is based on file imports. And a lot of the customization of your tenant comes from how we read those files. So if there is some issue with the data, or if there's something, again, that qualifies as what we would say a timing issue, I would say 95%, maybe upwards of that of the time, it's related to incorrectly running reports. That could be simply a human error, right? Like let's say that you run your outstanding liability report and you don't run it for the entirety of the year. If that's how you usually run it, you run it for the day prior because you're used to running all of your other reports for the day prior. You just ran a report that you regularly run incorrectly, or you know your bank file, it's always set to previous business day, you missed a day, so you needed to go back 2 days, something like that. That could cause some issues within reconciliation. But generally too, there's another aspect to incorrectly running reports where you're maybe not considering other factors that would change the reasonable parameters that you're running for a report. So I'll kind of repeat that because I said that in a confusing way. So, you know, your daily reports and maybe the SOPs that you have around how you run reports, maybe you just didn't follow that and there's some type of human error. That's a kind of a big aspect of running reports incorrectly that could cause timing issues. But the second one is considering reasonable parameters for how you're running your reports, and that can change over time. So here's a great example of that. During quarter end, or especially year end, it's super common for your tax processing people, if that's not you, to come in on the weekends and work on the weekends. Well, if you're operating in something like master tax and you're driving everything that you're bringing in to Finlee by created date, if you aren't encapsulating the created dates of the weekends when your tax team could potentially be working on the weekends, then it's likely that you'll miss tax payments that you need to pull into your system, into Finlee, into your reporting, to make sure that you're recording all reasonable transactions. Another example of that is, let's say that there was a banking holiday recently, and so you think that you didn't have to import any files. Sometimes your payroll departments or your accounting departments, whatever that is, will process ACH files or corresponding like PTS files, something like that, on the days that there's no banking activity technically, because it's a banking holiday, but they'll generate it on one day and then send it the next day. Well, if you don't import the activity that was generated on that day, then you're going to be missing items on your ledger, and you're going to have subledger rec issues and bank reconciliation issues. So there's really two aspects to running reports incorrectly. So if you guys haven't done this in a while, if you guys have just been running your reports the same way, if you've seen some timing issues, quote unquote timing issues, with like I had a huge increase in subledger rec items, maybe there's parameters of your reports that are no longer reasonable because operational changes have happened. So I would take stock of how you're running your reports and to make sure that it's reasonably pulling all activity. So that may be a good process to do before we get into quarter end again here in a couple of weeks. The other root cause of that maybe makes up the other 5%, or maybe it makes up a larger percent depending on your service bureau, is non-standardized operational practices. So I always say that reconciliation, some reconciliation people cannot become the favorite maybe in the office, because you'll always find if operationally another department is doing something inconsistently or incorrectly. I always say it's kind of like in your kitchen, there's that junk drawer. and you just tend not to look at it because, you just throw random things in there. But if you get on an organizational spot, which I get every spring, then you look and you shine a light on that drawer and you're like, well, what is in this drawer? I kind of have to completely take everything out and organize it. And that's really what reconciliation does. So if there's any inconsistency in operational practices, it's likely to impact your reconciliation on a daily basis. And there's kind of this natural ebb and flow of reconciling on a daily basis. Will show you kind of if your tax person is missing some payments, marking things as paid. So there's going to be kind of natural communication between the reconciliation person and the tax person if their operations are impacting. And then there's a need sometimes and pretty frequently, I'm sure, at least when you first started reconciling within Finlee, to change operations based on what you're seeing as a result of reconciliation. So I always recommend that if you're seeing something pretty consistently within Finlee as a subledger rec item that's coming up, then to kind of institute that change. A good example of that is, especially during quarter end and year end when it's just incredibly busy for tax individuals that are processing filings and quarterlies, all of that. That if they're making payments like on a website, to ensure that they're marking that as manually paid in the tax processing system. So things that they're doing outside of the system, whatever they need to do to mark that as paid or make sure that they finalize processing those amendments directly has an impact on your reconciliation. So I would make sure that there's a solid process of like a SOP related to, marking tax payments that you make outside or manually marking them in the system when they're actually paid, because that's a big source of what people would call timing issues. And I guess I would equate timing issues, usually root causes, to usually human error or operational inefficiencies, I guess is the word that I would use. So it's all usually human error related. So none of us are perfect. I know when I worked at a service bureau, I would make some decision of operational change and then I'd see in the reconciliation that it screwed everything up. And I'm like, I guess my assumption there was wrong. I have to adjust my operations there, even after I thought it was reasonable to make that change. So having that flexibility of maybe operationally, if there's something that we could do to address that, will help you in the long run decrease your items over time and just make life a little bit easier when it comes to reconciliation. There is, and I already kind of talked about this in the previous section, but there are ways to actually eliminate altogether timing issues. And taking that approach in your reconciliation, just like I said, will help you over time decrease the amount of items over time and make your life easier. It's possible that you're running your reports correctly, that you've have reasonable dates on all of your reports and you're not missing anything. But the nature of sometimes your operational practices, again, can naturally cause what we would call timing issues, but there's always a way to resolve those. And let me give a specific example because I'm being very general here. Let's say that you guys only send out impounds. So let's say a company ABC processes payroll and they process a week early. So they have an effective date and you're going to collect next week. If you as an organization don't want to send anything out that's going to settle farther than 2 days in the future. So today, like I would only send out everything that would be effective through the 21st. The payroll that's processed for the week later, like next week, has affected a lot of your reporting so that you have an increased amount of liabilities that you're going to pay out in the future related to taxes, but that impound hasn't actually been sent to the bank yet. And it's kind of in a holding pattern there. A lot of people will say, well, we haven't sent that via ACH yet. So we wouldn't want to record that on our ledger until it's actually remitted. Well, on the balancing side, your liabilities have increased, but you're holding on to that ACH transaction. You can introduce another report, and we have transaction types of like pre-process, if you haven't heard of that before, that we can temporarily increase the ledger to account for the increase of liabilities if something is processed really early and you guys have an internal standard not to send until 2 days prior to the effective date of the collection. So you can implement additional reports, and really all of the softwares that we've worked with in the past have sufficient reporting to eliminate sometimes operationally what will cause some of these timing issues and reconciliation. So there's always additional reports that can be introduced that can help with timing. If you guys have questions about those types of reports, or you see something like that consistently and you don't know what to introduce, then that's a good opportunity to reach out to us to talk about kind of potential solutions to that. I'm talking a lot about operational practices in this talk today, but operational practices really drive everything, all the exceptions that you're seeing, all the exceptions that, all the normal things that are processing well and not coming up as exceptions, all of that is driven by your operational practices. So like I said in the previous slide, if you are seeing regular exceptions happen and you know why they happen, but not instituting something that prevents them in the future, I kind of visualize a dog like trying to catch its own tail, when you're not instituting things that will help you eliminate those issues in the future. Do yourself a favor, and if you are in a different department than like the tax team, than the accounting team, that and their day-to-day processes are impacting reconciliation, it may be good to have a regular standing meeting with them. I'm sure none of us want more meetings in our life, but it may be good to institute some type of meeting with them to kind of see and tell them trends of what you see happening, and then involve them in the process of coming to a resolution of how that could fix what they're doing operationally could fix your reconciliation process. Eliminating noise from subledger reconciliation and getting kind of a grip on daily subledger reconciliation to a manageable extent is the absolute goal, so that you can see when actual valid issues come up. And what I'm trying to prevent by, dispelling the myth of timing issues is that, if you see too many things present to you, it becomes normal for you to see a lot of subledger rec items. And some people will take the approach then that, hey, like from one day to another, I'll see this item, I'll see 50 subledger rec items, then the next day I'll see 25. So these things are kind of naturally resolving, so I don't need to look into them. And I can wait until tomorrow to resolve these items. Well, it can be legitimate issues that need to be addressed daily, or it could be groups of issues where there's some type of underlying operational issue that can be addressed so that you don't get the spike of 50, so that you only get the 5, but those are 5 legitimate items that need to be resolved and need to be addressed as quickly as possible. So it's more about researching all of these items fully and then making operational or reporting changes that would then in turn give you less items so that you can cut down on the noise there. If we see too many items on a daily basis and we can't resolve them, then you're going to become a little numb to subledger rec items coming up and just think that maybe it's a non-issue, when if you refine your list and get, make sure that your reporting is strong, that your operations are strong, then legitimate items will come up every single day and you'll catch them as they're happening, rather than, catching something a month down the road because you thought that item was going to clear and you just perpetually leave that on your subledger reconciliation. That's not to be preachy. It sounded a little preachy, but we want to kind of eliminate some of these things that are happening because of your specific operations so that you can maintain a reasonable process on a day-to-day basis. If there's something that you can't resolve or that you can't get to the bottom to, I think it's really common for a subledger rec item to confuse someone. And then you're like, well, there's no resolution to this. I can't find why it's happening, so it must be invalid. Well, because of the nature of subledger rec items, I say this to customers all the time. It can be frustrating. It's a good thing that, Finlee only shows the exceptions that are happening, but I think it gives us a natural bias to seeing everything that's gone wrong when you don't see the 95% of what's gone right? Like we're only focusing on the exceptions that happen. And because it's the nature of an exception, especially if you have strong operational practices, it's something that did not go according to plan, or went incorrectly, or someone unknowingly did something wrong. So it's kind of inherently hard then to sometimes track back what happened, what caused the variance there. But it's an important process to do and get to the bottom of, because if there is some new instance, like let's say that there's a new tax person that came on and they're just unknowingly doing something incorrectly, it's really important that that's identified as quickly as possible. So if there's a reconciling item and you can't figure out why it's happened, maybe there's a recent update in your payroll software, there was some critical issue with a certain tax code that's new and the tax payment didn't generate properly, something like that. Our systems are always being updated, taxes are always changing. It's really important not to assume that because you can't find the reason that exception came up, that there must be no actual problem that happened. It's likely that it's just some type of problem that you've never come across before or identified before. And it's really important to get to the root cause of each exception there, because it could be a new instance of some type of exception. There's always something new to discover when it comes to reconciliation. And every time I work with a customer, there's always something new operationally that impacts reconciliation, or some type of new instance of an error that caused that exception. So if you get to that point where you're like, I don't know what to do with this item, that is why we're here to assist. A lot of us are from service bureaus previously and have done the work that you've done before. And as we all know, the service bureau life is a very unique one, working at a service bureau. And we want to make sure that we're able to assist you in resolving the item or getting to the root cause of that item. So reach out to us, email support@racheldigital.com. I know that some of you I probably worked with most of you on your implementations. If you've emailed me, you'll see a link to my calendar and you can schedule time on my calendar to go through that. We don't want you to get to a point where you're kind of despondent on a reconciliation item and you're just like, well, I can't figure it out, so it's probably not an issue. Well, hopefully that's the case, or it's just some type of system update. But if there's an exception that you can't find the nature of why it's reporting, then it could be systemic or an indication of a larger problem. So we want to make sure that we can resolve that. And if you've taken every course of action to try to resolve that and you cannot find that issue, then definitely reach out to us at support@racheldigital.com. We're here to help. So I don't see any questions in the chat on that section. I'll go into this next section, but of course, if anyone has any questions or comments, feel free to put that in the Q&A and chat. If there was a nickel for every time that I said that, and then you guys don't put anything in the chat, I'm just kidding. I just want to make sure that you guys know that this can go both ways too. You guys just don't have to sit here and listen to me, but you guys keep on showing up, so that's great. I'm glad you guys are getting something from this. So there's some questions that I think are good to ask yourself as you're going through reconciliation. That could be an indication of deficiencies in processes. So, if there's any homework from this, it may be to think about these questions. If there's any tinge of like, maybe I do that, maybe I don't do that, it may be good to like look at your processes or reach out to us and see if, hey, maybe there's something in my daily reconciliation that I can institute that will help me in the long term? So I thought these were just interesting questions to maybe ask yourself and take pull of where you're at right now. I think our session last time was on like the recommendations of a daily reconciliation. I think this is a little high level overview of like, okay, is there some underlying deficiency in my process that will that needs to be addressed? So things can get easier with reconciliation. And as you do it more, there should be trends of items that you can then address the root causes of, and then, see decreased items over time. So the first question I would probably ask myself when you're doing daily reconciliation, or looking back at the last couple of months of reconciliation, are there regular exceptions on the manage exceptions screen that do not qualify as exceptions? I don't know if the phrasing of that is the best. I came up with these questions, so that's a criticism on myself more than anyone else. But are you seeing items that regularly clear without any, intervention from yourself? So like, let's say that an aged uncleared item comes up, and you see it clear, you're like, hey, I know my aged uncleared items usually clear within a day or two. Is there something to consider of like, usually like related to tax payments? Let's take a tax payment that clears late, right? We drive every transaction date on tax payments, usually by due date, if your report has due date on it. So if you see tax payments regularly clearing late, or coming up as aged uncleared items, but you're like, hey, they always clear within a day or two after they come up on aged uncleared items, it may be worth asking the question of, why do we regularly have tax payments that are clearing after their due date? Sometimes that's completely out of your control. You're processing something manually on a site, and then, the Texas is deciding whenever they want to debit. It's probably a bad example of a state, but they're deciding when they want to debit that tax payment, and you really have no control over that. That's perfectly fine. But if there's consistently across multiple states tax payments clearing late, then it may be worth asking the question of like, are we sending it 2 days prior? If we're not, should we be sending it so that we ensure that it clears timely? Just because tax has been doing something a certain way doesn't mean that it has to stay that way. If there's something that could resolve it clearing closer to its due date, then maybe that's worth taking a look at to see if, we can eliminate items regularly popping up that then clear a few days later. That's just an example of one. I'm sure there's a million other examples of those, but getting to the root cause of why those are coming up as exceptions and then clearing a few days later. Is there something timing wise? Is there an initial report that we can include? Is there some type of operational practice that we can institute then to eliminate that issue? Do you regularly see an influx of subledger rec items? That is very common during quarter end to see that. I think everyone sees an influx of subledger rec items during quarter end, but do you regularly see outside of quarter end an influx of where one day will increase and they're like, well, it'll probably resolve by tomorrow, so you see it decrease, increase, decrease? That could be inconsistencies of how you're running your reports. That could be, again, operational issues that are impacting that. If you're seeing a regular influx, you become, like I said, a little despondent to like, subledger rec items. They always kind of go up and down. That's not a regular thing, or shouldn't be standard. So if that's happening to you, look back at report parameters, operational processes, and then see what can be instituted to eliminate that. What I would say, if you see a big increase in items, some clients come to us and like, where do we start? Like, I can't look at all of these items. Look at one fully, just pick one and then research it fully. And that's usually an indication of a larger issue. If you research one liability variance and you realize that you didn't include the weekend and tax came in on the weekend and created tax payments, then run a report for all of those tax payments that you're missing, import that into the system, refresh your subledger rec item, and it'll eliminate all the associated variances that came up because of that one issue. I was on a call with a customer this week, and they had a huge increase. I mean, like 1,000 subledger rec items. We identified one of them, then we eliminated about 800 of them in one swoop, and then the additional 200 plus, like they had like actual like 5 legitimate variances that day, was a different issue. So there was 2 separate reporting issues that caused the 1,000 subledger rec item of 1,000, and we were able to eliminate that within probably 15-20 minutes because we found legitimate issues like with reporting. So, and then they were able to work on the legitimate five issues that came up. So research one fully so that you don't get overwhelmed with the items there, address that issue, and that probably is related to a lot more of them, and then kind of use that as elimination strategy to go through all your subledger rec items that day. Are a large portion of your variances aged over 30 days? This kind of talks about, if you guys were here last time, I recommended that there's always a due date on all of your Kanban board cards there. There is something to say about the amount of time that it takes you to resolve items. I always think of it kind of like a snowball effect. If you are on a daily basis, you know, researching all the new items that come up, saying what the resolution needs to be, but then you're stopping the process there and not sending it either to the other departments or taking action to fully resolve the items, then the issues can compound on themselves. So I would set some type of standard for your organization. Maybe that's not 30 days. Maybe that's a quarter. Like a quarter makes sense to me. Like within this quarter, I need to resolve all of these items, and 3 months is a reasonable timeline for you all to resolve them. Like I would make sure that your cards aren't just sitting perpetually out there because, you know, let's say that you collected $500 too much for a customer. You're like, well, I don't have time to refund that to them, to detail to that to them right now. I caught it within the day that it happened, but then it took me 3 months to actually refund it to the customer. So it doesn't really matter that I identified it really early on in the process. The customer is going to see that, hey, it still took me 3 months to get my money back that you over collected. So resolving those items, timely setting kind of a standard for the resolution of those items, and then really utilizing due dates, I think on cards helps eliminate that issue. I don't think I have Finlee up right now, but on the dashboard, there's even an element of the age of the items on the Kanban board. If you have a lot that are 90 days, 120 days overdue, it may be worth looking into those items and focusing some attention on resolving those because issues will compound. It's a little bit of a snowball effect. Have your number of variances increased or decreased over time? I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but generally, as you're reconciling on a daily basis, you'd want to see a trend overall. Like if you're looking and thinking about the time from when you started Finlee to now, you should be seeing decreases in the amount of subledger rec items that you're seeing because naturally subledger rec items, unless it's a one-off instance, which we all have, and that probably happens every single day, but there are trends of variances that happen that can be resolved, you know, if you make operational changes or change report parameters. I think that's the theme of today, report parameters and operational practices. But if you haven't seen a trend of items decreasing over time, you may need to institute, like I said, maybe a quarterly meeting with your tax department and your accounting department and talk about trends of items and come to a conclusion together of, okay, maybe as a tax individual, I can always make sure to finalize my amendment, note that, you know, this collection is going out because that will really help reconciliation, and anything related to amendments, document more so I can track those and we can resolve those more timely. There's always operational practices to make more efficient, and a lot of those are directly impacting your reconciliation on a daily basis there. I think, yeah, that was it for today. The theme of today is operational practices and report parameters, but because reports are driving all of the information that we read into Finlee, I cannot overstate enough how important how you run your reports and making sure that you're importing like a total overview of the activity that should happen on your accounts. Using those reports is absolutely vital. And then your operations have so much to do with how you're interacting with Finlee on a day-to-day basis. So there are things that you can do to decrease items over time, to make reconciliation faster. And really, even with like clients that we have more involvement in on a daily reconciliation, we tend to see when we first implement them that reconciliation takes much longer than it does over the months that we're assisting them. And because we're able to identify and meet with them to make operational changes and see decreasing items over time. So that's all I'm going to lecture you guys about today. Hopefully that, gave you something to consider if you see kind of your daily reconciliation process as any of those deficiencies and processes, like if you're saying yes to any of those that you haven't seen a decrease over time, and maybe time to kind of take stock of your daily process there. And of course, feel free to reach out to us at support@rachdigital.com, and we can discuss those further if you have any concerns that kind of came up from your mind while we're talking through these operational changes. So that is it for today. I'll give you guys some time back. If there's any questions, I will hang around. You can put that in the chat or QA. And again, if you have any topic suggestions, feel free to email us at support@rachdigital.com. Thanks so much, you guys. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Erin.
Thank you. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you, Erin.
Thanks. Thanks, Dwight. Thanks, Maggie. All right, I think we're good. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.